Hello everyone, welcome to Gmotion School, where we're going to learn all things animated related to C4D. Today we're going to be going over this animation I made about 6 months ago, 8 months ago. We're going to go over the fundamentals of how this is working, cover voxel animation, and kind of show you how to create organic growing structures very easily with voxel techniques. Without any further ado, let's jump into it. Here we are in C4D. Please note that I'm using version 2023.2. I've set my UI to the standard, so it's easiest to follow along. So if we look at the artwork, we will notice the final ending structure is these large pillar shapes. We're actually going to model this first and then work in reverse down to our starting shape. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab a primitive cylinder. We can decrease its size a little bit on the radius. So let's make the radius 20. Working to the hotkey of NB to bring up our display points, mesh display. What we want to do next is basically go to the cap section and add a fillet. It's up to you, your own personal preference of how wide this radius you want it to be, but for the look I'm going for, I kind of want to keep it a little tight. A fillet of 4 segments is probably fine. And then we will need a little more horizontal resolution and vertical resolution here. So in terms of our height segments, let's make this 6. And then the rotation segments is more important. We're going to go 22. Let's try 30. So you just want like a medium mesh like this that isn't too jagged. We will be running this through the volume builder over here, which will smooth things out, but for now this is fine. So next step is we want to create a cloning array of these. So let's drop it into a cloner. If we hold Alt, as we click the cloner with our object selected, the cloner will automatically parent your cylinder. So that's like a really good hotkey to keep in mind. From here, let's go to the cloner object properties, and we want to click radial. We want to change the plane of this distribution of these clones to XY, and immediately you will see we are starting to get the kind of orientation of the artwork, but we need to fix the radius. The radius needs to be decreased to 0, and we only want 3 of these. So now you will see we have a shape is kind of the base to our whole system. We are going to actually make the cylinder a little taller, given how it looks here. We want them to stand a little further from our initial radius. Let's do, let's try 400. No, let's try 300. So we've got the right length now. Now let's create another iteration of this cloner on the other axis. So let's just select our cloner, hold down Control and click above on the hierarchy, drag and click. You'll create a duplicate. This one, we want to select the cloner, go over to the rotate tool, and rotate by 90 degrees. There we go. So now we have our base object. The reason I chose this object for this animation is because it's actually kind of a hard object to 3D model. This kind of shape would be quite hard to resolve all these intersecting seams here. But it's just a really good way to show off the power of voxels and how voxels can give you meshes with like really complicated welding zones kind of here, just through their nature, how they're scanning for geometry and space. Let's minimize our cloners, and we are going to go over to the volume builder tag here, tab, and we're going to create a volume builder. Nothing's going to happen at first, but we're going to select both of our cloners and drop them into the builder. So as soon as you do this, you will see the voxels kind of scanning your source geometry. Again, depending on what scale you built this with me, this will be quite pixelated. So we're gonna go over the the basic driving components of how to use voxels correctly for your scene scale. You kind of have to be flexible, understanding what scale you're working at in terms of the values that you operate into the volume builder. So let's click on our volume builder, go to the object parameters. You're going to see that we have both of our cloners here. And what's really interesting here is that there's a mode on top of the second one. This is kind of like a blending mode. We're going to be using this later to drive the animation, but just notice that you have to see both of your objects underneath the builder for this to work. If you haven't linked them correctly, if they don't show up here. So the biggest thing we want to address with our voxels is the voxel scale here. This is a really important parameter. It's pretty much the main parameter you have to be aware of and working in this workflow. So obviously we can see right now it's a little too pixelated. So we're going to want to increase this resolution, which actually means decreasing the size. So it moves in the opposite direction. The lower this value, the higher the resolution, and the more memory, CPU, computation, everything will increase. So this is also an exponential value. So 5 is not half of 10. So let's put this down to 2 centimeters. And immediately you will see a jump in form and shape. And you can see the voxels are interpolating our object much closer with more accuracy. You also notice that in the middle here, and this is why I chose this object, these seams here, these welding points, are actually getting fused. The voxels are understanding that these are actually connecting to each other. Whereas in our mesh, they have no context to each other here. They're just completely intersecting and destroying each other. So with the volume builder, you're immediately building resolve on the formal aspects of this object. So the next thing we want to do is we want to kind of create our shape that's going to be growing from this pillar source. So we're actually going to do this, we're actually going to turn the volume builder off for now. We want to just see our mesh here, our base pillars, as a guide and a reference point. So let's grab go to our primitives tab and grab a sphere. And we're going to increase the type of mesh to icosahedron. And we're going to increase the segments to around 80. What we're also going to do is we want to decrease the radius of our sphere down to the initial size of our object. So however small you make this is how small the start of the animation will be. So obviously, as you can tell, if we make it too small here, we can't see what we're doing inside of our pillar object. So I'm going to show you a trick with a quick tag that on both of these, if you select both your cloners, right click, go to render tags, display. If you click the checkbox, the first checkbox on the tag properties, use, and go down to shading mode and go down to lines. This is a really useful way of seeing geometry when you're doing these kind of interactive overlapping animation techniques. So now if we scale this smaller, we can actually see the size of our object that we want to start with. So we're actually going to make this quite small. Let's make it around there. You just wanted to have it in the center of your object and be small enough that you don't even see any of the pillars at the start, that it's just like an object in the center. From here, we want to add displacement onto the sphere because you'll see in the original animation, this isn't just a sphere laying there. It's this interesting kind of triangular shape. And all of this is driven by noise. So we are going to create a displacement displacer. We want to drag it underneath the sphere so it is affecting the sphere. Go over to the shading tab of the displacer, pump in the shader with some noise. After putting noise into the displacer, let's control click the toggles on the cloners to hide them from view. We just want to see what's going on with our displacer a little more clearly. So let's select our displacer again, click on the image window of the noise to jump into the noise settings. And what we're going to do first is change the noise type to Luca. Obviously, it's a little crazy at first, so we want to secondly increase the global scale. I use noises for so many things in animation, and the global scale can get so much mileage out of different noises. We want it to be a little chunky too, so let's decrease the octaves to maybe 3.5. So now we're getting not like crazy distortion, but an interesting shape. Let's make the animation speed 0.3. And then we're also going to, let's adjust it further. Let's go back up to the displacer by clicking on the displacer. Object, let's increase the push and pull maybe to 15. Seems okay. And let's go back to the shading of the noise. Increase this a little further, mess around here, decrease it a little bit. That looks okay. Again, you could spend all day in here adjusting your noise parameters. I definitely spent time adjusting these parameters to create the most cool shape I could. But moving on, let's pipe our sphere underneath the volume builder. Let's control click everything back on. And again, right away, you will see that the volume builder just treated our sphere here, as you can see the little chunk sticking out, as just part of the volume, so it just fused it. This is not the look we're going for. So what we're going to have to do is go back over to the volume builder mode options, like I said at the beginning. This is where we get to utilize a really cool aspect of voxels, which is their ability to Boolean and subtract shape. So let's change the mode to intersect. And now all of a sudden, all the voxels have snapped just to our original shape. And what's great about this is that this original shape here is a sphere. It's still procedural. It's still a primitive, which means we can animate its radius. So what we want to do is let's shrink our sphere down to something, say, like that. And let's go to the start of our timeline. Frame 0. Let's select our sphere, go to the radius, and click on the keyframe icon beside the radius button. And let's go further down our timeline to say frame 60. And let's increase our radius to, let's say, 90. And again, hit that keyframe button beside the radius icon. And again, immediately, if we click off, deselect, if we go back to the start of our animation, we can immediately see that we have a growing pillar shape, or at least the start of it. You can see it stops at a certain threshold, and that threshold depends on the radius of our sphere. You can pause at any time and select your sphere within the builder, and you can actually see its silhouette. So if we zoom in here, you can actually see that this orange line is where it is intersecting and creating our animated shape. Something useful to know. Let's select our sphere again. We want this to grow out and reveal the entire object. So let's go to the last frame of our animation. Right now I have 150 frames. If you have a different amount of frames, just put them in here. Just type 150 and go to the very last frame at 150, select our sphere, and increase the radius until our whole pillar object is revealed. Let's say around there. Again, click on the keyframe icon beside the radius button to solidify that. So now if we go back to the beginning frame, frame 0, and press play, we will see our growing voxel animation. Next up is creating the bubbles that you see within the original animation. So if we open that quickly, as you watch this play, an added detail that really sells this piece is the emergence of bubbles. So there's a bubble here, there's some ones here catching light. And these bubbles really kind of expand the quality of the glass to make it feel a little more surreal and realistic. So we're going to show you how we can use the exact same technique I just outlined to subtract bubbles. So jumping back in, let's control click all of our objects. We don't need any of them right now. And let's grab another primitive. So we want this primitive to be pretty small. It's going to be a bubble in our scene. If we show our pillars strictly on here, we kind of get the relative scale idea of how big they should be. So let's make them around 7 centimeters. Let's toggle this off again. And with our new sphere selected, let's Alt-click on the cloner to make a parent. And now let's manipulate the cloner width here. We want to have 5 rows, 5 count on the Z, and probably I would say 5 counts on the Y. And again, feel free to zoom out and scale this. What you want to do is just create a field of particles, of bubbles that will interact with our main pillar object. So I like how this is looking. Let's add another row on X. So 4, 5, 5 is what I have right now. We're going to add some variation to this because obviously we don't want all bubbles just to be in a grid and to be all the same size. So with our cloner selected, let's grab a random effector. Under the effector tab, go to random. Again, just make sure if you have your cloner selector, if you go to effectors, that you see the random popping up here. Otherwise, you didn't have it selected. So if not, if this isn't here, just drop down the random inside. So immediately with the random effector going, you can see all the positions have changed and randomized. We want to use this, but we also want to change the scale. So with the random effector selector, go to the parameter tab, scale, uniform scale, and let's just change the scale here like this. So now we have varying different sizes of bubbles. What we also want to do is change the standard topology of our spheres. We could have done this at the start, but I'm just remembering now. But let's just select our sphere, go to type, icosahedron, and let's give it 20 segments. So it's just a little more resolution. Not crazy though, but nice and even distribution for the voxels. What we're also going to do is we want them to not just be static. Right now, if we press play, the bubbles aren't moving. They're just kind of staying in place. They've been randomly distributed by the random effector, but the random effector is not giving them any animation. So let's click on a random effector, go to the effector tab, random mode. We want to change this from random to noise. And immediately just doing that, if we go back to the start of our timeline, press play, we have a noisy animated version of the random effector. Right now it's a little too much in terms of like bubbles wouldn't quite act this way. So let's change the animation speed to 50%. That's a little better. They're still moving a little too fast. Let's go 25%. That's better. I do want them to have a little more vertical movement. So let's go to our random effector. From effectors, go to the parameter tab and go to position Y, and let's increase the Y a little bit. There, I like how that's looking. They just have a little more bounce going upwards. So let's pause our animation, go back to frame 0, go back to our hierarchy stack and turn everything on. Again, here's our base object, you can see. And let's now drop our new system with the cloner into the volume builder stack. So let's drop the cloner underneath the volume builder. It's on the very top. Again, as soon as you drop it in by default, the volume builder will just treat it as a union mode. But we want to treat this as a subtraction from all of our other data. Everything underneath. So our cloner is up on top. Let's actually rename our cloner. Let's call it bubbles. Just so we can tell in the volume builder, it's not one of these original ones. Go back to the volume builder, you will see the name updated. And on the mode of the bubbles, you want to hit subtract. So right now, nothing is going to happen. But if we press play, obviously this will be a little slower playback now. There will be emerging bubble areas. So I just saw one there. Whoop. This little sphere here is our first bubble. And there actually might be some, there's another one right there. So we're already starting to get those details. And before we turn this into a glass material, it will actually be hard to tell where all of our bubbles are. But we can see some on the surface, but there will be some interior bubbles that we can't see just because we are blocked by the default material. We don't have any glass or like specularness going on right now. So let's let this play a little longer. I like the size of these bubbles so far. It looks like the cloner setup is working well. So there's our second detail added. Next, what we want to do is start making a mesh. We have all of our elements, but we need to start making this into a mesh that we can use. So let's just go to the start of our timeline again, and this is where we're going to start to introduce the second phase of our volume, which is if you click on the volume tab here, the volume mesher. So let's just create one of those. Let's drag it down and drop our whole system of our volume builder underneath the mesher. And immediately you will see that it snaps into place with a mesh. If you can't see the mesh, just hit NB on your keyboard, and it will pop open the wireframe. So this is looking decent resolution for how small this is. Again, remember, as we zoom up here, the resolution will increase, not the resolution, but the actual data, because our scene starts very small and grows larger. But this is already looking quite good. Again, if we hit NA to go back to our shading, we will see that we have some highlights here, but there's a couple little artifacts. And again, we still have the artifacts from the edges of our mesh showing through from our pillars. So what's really cool is now that we have this meshed, we can actually dial in smoothing out this result so it's less janky. And the first step to doing that is going into the volume builder, and underneath our stack of objects, you can drag this down. You'll see there's an SDF smooth. So let's click on that. And immediately once you click on it, it will kind of like destroy your shape a little bit. It kind of goes it's quite strong at the start. So you'll see it also created an SDF smooth on the stack here. So let's select the smooth, and the voxel distance, let's put down to 1. And the strength, maybe let's put this down to maybe around 80%. Just enough where we don't, the edges of our mesh aren't super obvious. And then this isn't the only smoothing technique we're going to do. We don't want to go crazy with this smoothing right here. Because yeah, it will just destroy our shape. So we want to keep it intact a little bit. And then the next thing we're going to do is we want to create another smoothing outside of this that acts on top. So with our whole stack selected, let's just hit Alt G. This will group everything into a null. This is like a very awesome hotkey. So again, if you missed that, just click on your volume mesher. Alt G will create a null group out of everything. Let's just name this animated. And then in here, we can actually drag in additional smoothing underneath our master null that will affect our mesher. So let's go back to our deformers, grab a smoothing deformer, drag this underneath the null, and this will actually affect the smoothness here. So we can see here, this is actually affecting our object, and we can like go crazy with the smoothness, but we just want to provide a little extra smoothing to get rid of any other details, but keep it relatively. There we go. So now we have less broken topology, and if we go NB to our wireframe, yeah, there aren't too many artifacts in the seams here. So NA again. Let's test our animation so far and go back to frame 1, press play. You will notice a playback difference as we start to mesh everything out and smooth things. But now that we have this playing and it's getting smoothed, you will see that all of our seams and even our bubbles, nothing's breaking with crazy edges or anything like that. So let's just continue to let this play. There's one of our first big bubbles. There's another one. There we go. So this is definitely becoming what we need for the animation. So let's let this play out fully. Okay, so you will notice it is slower as you keep going. This is because there is more and more mesh as you let it grow. There are adaptive mesh settings in the volume mesher, but I don't want to go over those because they can kind of break. They can just introduce more artifacts. For this, we can keep it down and keep full resolution. Again, if your Cinema 4D is having a hard time playing this back, you're going to have to increase your voxel size. So if 0.7 is too small for you, it depends on your initial pillar sizes, your sphere size. All of this is size dependent. Just increase your voxel size if you want better playback. But this is looking good as closer to a final result of our theory here. So let's actually freeze out this animation so that we can start doing the next phase, which is dynamics. So making this whole object work with dynamics and actually grow and bounce off a surface, not just kind of grow on its own. That's what really sells the initial animation, is that we have it's kind of placed like a sculpture, and then it bounces to life like popcorn. And that is from the next process of saving as alembic and introducing dynamics. So let's jump back in. So the next step of saving as alembic, we will start by selecting our volume mesher. The object actually has a mesh to it, and we're going to right click and hit bake as alembic. This is going to prompt up a file window. You just want to save this alembic file alongside your project file or somewhere suitable. Let's just do this, hit select, and let's let this bake out quickly. All right, so the alembic has finished. You'll notice there's a new object on the bottom of the stack called volume mesher, and it has a polygon symbol with a little A beside it. That's the alembic mesh symbol. So let's drag our new alembic to the very top above our null. And what we're going to want to do is just turn off all of our old systems that we made to generate this. So let's just, withholding control, let's just click down, disable everything. And if you want to make sure make sure everything is gone, just do this with the toggle items if you want as well. So now we're left with our new mesh. Let's rename this alembic animation. And you will see that as soon as we go back to the start and press play, we're getting way faster playback. This is a huge advantage of using Alembics in your workflow, is that you will get really high resolution assets that you maybe made a simulation in Houdini or exported some kind of Boolean operation like this. You can export them as Alembic meshes and have much higher fidelity assets that actually play back. Again, it will chug a little bit near the end as there's like a lot of vertices, but it's still playing back way better than when it was in the form of the volume builder when we first made it. So what we want to do now is bring this new optimized Alembic version of our mesh and start making it dynamic. So let's go to our primitives. Let's select a plane. Let's make the plane a little bigger here, just so we don't fall off the edges. Okay, so so before we start adding any tags or doing anything else with the bullet solvers or anything like that, we want to have a good setup where our starting object is sitting nice and flush to the floor. So let's move our object up a little bit, and we're going to use one of my favorite new movement tools in newer versions of Cinema called the dynamic place over here. So with our alembic selected, we're just going to hit dynamic place. All of a sudden, there's these different parameters that show up around our object. But what's really great is when if we move our object down, it is actually tumbling around our scene, sitting flush. So what we want to do is actually do this on frame 0 to make sure that everything starts flush. So let's move our object again. Let's go back to frame 0 and do the same thing. So grab our alembic, dynamic place, bring this down so it is sitting flush with the floor. That's a good starting position. And what's great about this dynamic place is that it's a great way to set up dynamics, is that everything now from our initial setup is super clean for the tags to work on top of. So let's go back to the normal move tool, leave it alone, deselect. With our object sitting flush, let's go to our plane, right click, bullet tags, collider body, and bullet tags, and then go next to our alembic, right click bullet tags, rigid body. And immediately when you press play from this point, there will be proper dynamics working. I am going to bake this right away, just because if you press play now and you move it later, there's a little bit of a weird glitch that happens. So we're just going to select our tag, our rigid body tag on our alembic, go to cache, bake all. So let's just bake out this dynamics. This is going to be pretty fast. Okay, our dynamics have been baked out. You'll see their icon has changed. And now, if we go back to normal shading mode, shortcut NA, if we press play, we will see our object dynamically bouncing and growing from its origin spot. Just like my initial animation, it's popping up like popcorn. What's really cool about this is that this would be quite more challenging to make unless we had this more sophisticated alembic mesh. Trying to do this with dynamics with the normal volume builders before they're like baked out would be very slow. So this is the advantage of being able to save out things as alembic and get much more advanced animation that will dynamically play with a sophisticated mesh and collider tags. So let's hit NB. We will see that none of our objects are popping through the floor. Everything is working very stably. So this concludes the first part series of this animation. If you guys liked what you saw, please like and subscribe. I'm obviously, it's my first video, but I'm going to be putting a lot of effort into YouTube in the future, and yeah, I just would really appreciate it. We are going to be going over the next phases. Is already kind of running long, this tutorial. So in part 2, we would be looking to explain the shading and the rendering of this animation. This will involve making this particle system with the emission lights and like different materials and lighting and stuff. So I did split this up into a part 1 and part 2. But thank you so much for your time, and consider subscribing. Also, please feel free to check out my Instagram, Instagram at Gabriel Mazowich. On there, you'll see the animation we chose today, as well as other 3D artworks that I've made in the past. And feel free to comment any of these past artworks, or let me know any other animations you see within my catalog that you would like me to explain or to do a tutorial on. Thanks so much, guys. Peace out.